Tuesday, 6:30 a.m. The interstate highway cutting through the dense pine forests of North Carolina was slick with morning dew. The early commuter traffic was light, consisting mostly of commercial trucks and locals heading toward the massive military installation 30 miles down the road. Driving smoothly in the right lane was Samuel Barrett. At 50 years old, Samuel was a sharply built black man with a close-shaved head and a posture that remained perfectly rigid even while sitting in traffic. He was wearing civilian clothes, a crisp navy blue polo shirt and neatly pressed khaki slacks. He looked like a mid-level corporate manager heading to a boring regional seminar. In reality, he was Colonel Samuel Barrett, the staff judge advocate, SJA, for a major command. He was the military equivalent of a chief prosecutor, a man who possessed a devastating command of constitutional law and spent his days dismantling the careers of corrupt officers in high-stakes courts-martial. But this morning, Samuel was off the clock, driving a rented black Chrysler 300 premium sedan. He had his cruise control set exactly to the posted speed limit. His hands rested lightly on the leather steering wheel at the 10 and 2 o'clock positions. Before we watch this arrogant patrolman completely destroy his own career over a baseless traffic stop, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments what city or country you're watching from today. Samuel was listening to a dry, hours-long podcast on federal appellate court rulings. He was perfectly relaxed, enjoying the quiet drive, entirely unaware that he was about to become the target of a fishing expedition. Sitting in his Ford Explorer police interceptor in the grassy median crossover was Officer Derek Mitchell. Mitchell was a 5-year veteran of the county sheriff's department who considered himself a proactive hunter on the highway. He didn't just look for speeders, he looked for anomalies. He profiled vehicles and the people driving them. As the black Chrysler cruised past his hiding spot, Mitchell's eyes locked onto it. Mitchell noticed the out-of-state Florida license plates on a premium, dark-tinted rental car. Then, as the car passed, he noticed the black driver. In Mitchell's heavily biased mental playbook, this combination was an immediate red flag. He decided right then and there that the driver wasn't a tourist or a businessman. To Mitchell, a dark-tinted rental car on this stretch of interstate was a textbook profile for someone moving cash or narcotics. Mitchell didn't have a legal, articulable reason to stop the car, but he knew exactly how to manufacture one. He threw his cruiser into drive, tires spitting wet grass and gravel as he accelerated hard onto the highway. He pulled up close behind the Chrysler, tailgating aggressively. It was an intimidation tactic. He was hoping the driver would glance in the rearview mirror, panic at the sight of the police cruiser, and make a sudden jerky lane change or tap the brakes. Samuel Barrett did neither. His heart rate didn't spike. He noted the cruiser in his mirror, maintained his perfect speed, and kept his car dead center in the lane. Frustrated by the driver's absolute lack of reaction, Mitchell resorted to the oldest trick in the patrolman's playbook, the phantom traffic violation. He decided that the Chrysler's right rear tire had grazed the solid white fog line on the edge of the road for a fraction of a second. It was a minor, virtually unprovable claim that officers routinely used as a legal pretext to initiate a stop. Mitchell hit a button on his center console. The overhead light bar erupted, painting the early morning highway in aggressive flashes of red and blue. Inside the quiet cabin of the rental car, Samuel Barrett simply sighed. He didn't curse. He didn't scramble to hide anything in the glove box or check his pockets. He was a man who practically lived inside courtrooms. He knew exactly how this game was played. Samuel checked his mirrors, activated his right turn signal, and smoothly guided the heavy sedan onto the wide gravel shoulder, coming to a gentle stop. He shifted the car into park and turned off the engine. With practiced, deliberate movements, Samuel rolled down all 4 windows of the vehicle to remove any perceived blind spots for the approaching officer. Finally, he placed both of his empty hands flat on the very top of the steering wheel, remaining in absolute chilling silence as he waited for Officer Mitchell to make his approach. The heavy thud of the police cruiser's door echoed sharply across the quiet, pine-lined highway. Officer Derek Mitchell stepped out onto the gravel shoulder, adjusting his heavy nylon duty belt with a practiced, aggressive tug. As he walked toward the black Chrysler 300, he reached out and firmly pressed his hand against the vehicle's rear taillight, leaving a smudge of a fingerprint, a standard law enforcement procedure designed to prove he was at the vehicle in case the stop went violent. Mitchell unsnapped the retention strap on his holster. He walked up to the driver's side window, fully expecting to look down at a nervous, stammering driver, hastily digging through the center console. Instead, Mitchell was met with a scene that immediately threw his internal script off balance. All 4 windows of the sedan were rolled completely down, removing any shadows or blind spots. The driver wasn't frantically searching for his wallet. He was sitting perfectly still, his posture rigid, with both hands resting in plain sight at the 10 and 2 o'clock positions on the leather steering wheel. Samuel Barrett didn't turn his head to look up at the officer. He kept his eyes locked straight ahead on the horizon. It was a display of utter, chilling compliance that paradoxically robbed Mitchell of all his presumed authority. "Morning," Mitchell said, his voice carrying the forced, abrasive cheerfulness of a cop looking for a reason to escalate. He leaned slightly into the window frame, invading the cabin's space. Standard procedure dictated that Mitchell should immediately state his name, his agency, and the reason for the stop. Mitchell bypassed all of that. He went straight for the psychological trap. "You know why I pulled you over today?" "No, officer, I do not," Samuel replied. His voice was a flat, resonant baritone. It contained zero anxiety, zero deference, and absolutely no willingness to engage in small talk. Mitchell's jaw tightened. The driver wasn't volunteering an apology or accidentally confessing to speeding. "You were drifting," Mitchell lied smoothly, resting his hand near his weapon. "Your right tires crossed the solid fog line back there. You tired? You been drinking this morning?" "I have not been drinking," Samuel answered. He didn't defend his driving. He didn't argue about the fog line. He gave Mitchell a strictly literal answer to the specific question asked, starving the interrogation of any useful oxygen. "Where are you heading in such a hurry?" Mitchell pressed, ignoring the answer and shifting tactics. "I am not in a hurry," Samuel said, his eyes still fixed straight ahead. "I am driving to my hotel." The sheer brevity of the answers began to infuriate Mitchell. In his world, a civilian who wasn't intimidated was a civilian who was hiding something. Mitchell took a half step back, his tone hardening into a demand. "I need to see your driver's license and the registration for the vehicle." "This is a rental vehicle," Samuel stated calmly. "The rental agreement is in the glove compartment. My driver's license is in my right rear pocket. Which document would you like me to retrieve first?" Mitchell blinked. The driver was narrating his movements. It was an advanced de-escalation tactic, explicitly used to prevent a trigger-happy officer from claiming the suspect reached for a weapon. The fact that this black man in a civilian polo shirt was executing police-level procedural tactics irritated Mitchell to his core. "Just get the license," Mitchell snapped. Samuel slowly removed his right hand from the wheel, retrieved his wallet, and handed over his state-issued driver's license. As Mitchell took the plastic card, he pulled a high-lumen tactical flashlight from his belt. Even though the morning sun was fully up, Mitchell clicked the light on and began aggressively sweeping the beam around the pristine interior of the rental car. He scanned the floorboards, the passenger seat, and the center console, desperately fishing for anything that resembled probable cause. An open container, a stray pill, a suspicious scent. Nothing. Then, the harsh beam of the flashlight swept into the back seat. Lying flat across the rear leather bench was a long, black, opaque garment bag. It was thick, heavy-duty nylon, zipped completely shut. Mitchell paused. His eyes narrowed. In the mind of a biased, proactive cop looking for a bust, a long, heavy bag on the back seat of a rental car wasn't a suit. It was a rifle. It was a shotgun. It was the perfect, legally ambiguous excuse he needed to tear the car apart under the guise of officer safety. Mitchell clicked off the flashlight and leaned back into the window, a smug, dangerous smile creeping onto his face. "What's in the long black bag on the back seat, Samuel?" Mitchell asked, intentionally using the driver's first name to establish dominance. "Clothing," Samuel answered evenly. "Clothing," Mitchell repeated, his voice dripping with heavy skepticism. He tapped the roof of the car with his knuckles. "Looks an awful lot like a rifle bag to me. We get a lot of guys running weapons up this interstate. I think we need to make sure you aren't transporting anything illegal today." Samuel Barrett finally turned his head. He looked up at Officer Mitchell with a stare so heavy and analytical it felt like a physical weight. The trap had been set. Samuel Barrett stared at Officer Mitchell. The patrolman's aggressive smirk was practically begging for an argument, hoping the driver would lose his temper and provide the necessary probable cause for an arrest. But Samuel didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply delivered a constitutional brick wall. "Officer," Samuel said, his voice echoing with absolute crystalline clarity, "I am not transporting any weapons or illegal items. Furthermore, I do not consent to any searches of this vehicle or my personal property." The words hung in the crisp morning air. For a patrol cop used to dealing with frightened teenagers or panicked drug couriers, a calm, legally precise refusal of consent was like a slap in the face. Mitchell's smirk vanished instantly, his face flushed with indignation. To a bad cop, knowing your rights is often treated as the ultimate sign of disrespect. "Is that right?" Mitchell sneered, his hand dropping aggressively back down to rest on the grip of his service weapon. He leaned closer to the window, his breath fogging the glass. "Well, here's the problem, Samuel. You've got an opaque, heavy-duty bag taking up the entire back seat that is perfectly sized for a long gun. You're out of state, in a dark-tinted rental, acting highly defensive. That gives me reasonable suspicion." It was a gross overreach of the law, and Samuel knew it. A garment bag in a rental car does not constitute reasonable suspicion of a crime. But Samuel also knew that the shoulder of a lonely interstate was not a courtroom. You don't litigate the Fourth Amendment with an armed, angry man on the side of the road. You let him make his mistakes on camera. "I am perfectly calm, officer," Samuel replied, remaining perfectly still. "And my denial of consent is not defensive. It is my constitutional right." "Save the law degree for the judge, buddy," Mitchell snapped, his patience entirely exhausted. He took a step back from the door and pointed a rigid finger at Samuel. "I can't verify what's in that bag, and I'm not taking a bullet today because you want to play games. For my safety and for yours, you are currently being detained. Unbuckle your seatbelt with your left hand, open the door with your right, and step out of the vehicle. Legally, under Pennsylvania versus Mims, an officer has the right to order a driver out of the vehicle during a lawful traffic stop." Samuel knew the case law backward and forward. He did not hesitate. With slow, highly telegraphed movements, Samuel unclicked his seatbelt, popped the door handle, and stepped out onto the gravel shoulder. Even out of the car, Samuel towered slightly over Mitchell. He stood with the perfect, rigid posture of a military officer at attention. "Turn around and face the car. Put your hands behind your back," Mitchell barked, pulling his metal handcuffs from his tactical belt. Samuel didn't ask if he was under arrest. He didn't demand a supervisor. He silently turned around, placed his hands behind his back, and laced his fingers together. Mitchell grabbed Samuel's wrists with unnecessary force, jerking his arms upward before snapping the cold steel cuffs tightly around his wrists. He locked the ratchets with a sharp, metallic click-click. "You are being detained pending a safety sweep of that vehicle," Mitchell stated, patting Samuel down roughly for weapons. Finding nothing but a cell phone and hotel keys, Mitchell grabbed Samuel by the bicep and marched him toward the front hood of the police cruiser, forcing him to stand directly in front of the dashboard camera. "Don't move," Mitchell ordered. Samuel stood perfectly still, the cold steel biting into his wrists. He looked straight into the lens of the police cruiser's dash cam, his expression an emotionless mask. He had just been unlawfully detained, based on a fabricated traffic violation and a blatant misapplication of this officer safety doctrine. Mitchell turned his back on Samuel and walked eagerly toward the open door of the black Chrysler. The officer thought he was about to make the drug or weapon bust of his career. He had absolutely no idea he was about to unzip a legal nightmare that would completely destroy his life. Samuel Barrett stood perfectly still in front of the Ford Explorer, the morning sun glinting off the polished steel handcuffs binding his wrists. He kept his eyes locked straight ahead, his posture immaculately straight, allowing the cruiser's dashboard camera to record every second of his calm, non-threatening demeanor. He was an officer of the law, a military prosecutor who had spent his adult life upholding the Constitution, and he was currently experiencing its blatant violation firsthand. 30 feet away, Officer Derek Mitchell was practically vibrating with adrenaline and manufactured authority. He walked to the rear passenger door of the black Chrysler 300, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. He pulled the door handle, breaking the threshold of the vehicle. By opening that door without a warrant, without probable cause, and over the explicit objection of the driver, Mitchell had just committed a severe violation of the Fourth Amendment. He was gambling his entire career on the flimsy officer safety pretext, a gamble that required him to find a weapon inside that bag to justify the illegal intrusion. Mitchell leaned into the pristine leather interior of the rental car. He reached across the back seat and grabbed the heavy black nylon garment bag. His thick fingers squeezed the material, expecting to feel the rigid steel barrel of a shotgun or the hard plastic of a rifle stock. Instead, he felt the soft, yielding structure of heavy fabric and a wooden hanger. A cold, uncomfortable prickle of doubt hit the back of Mitchell's neck, but his ego pushed him forward. He yanked the bag closer to the door, grabbed the heavy brass zipper at the bottom, and pulled it forcefully upward, splitting the opaque nylon wide open. Mitchell peered inside, his tactical flashlight illuminating the contents. There was no rifle. There were no bundles of cash. There were no vacuum-sealed bags of narcotics. Hanging inside the garment bag, pressed to absolute razor-sharp perfection, was a United States Army service uniform. The dark blue tunic was immaculate. The gold-braided bands on the sleeves indicated senior officer rank. Pinned precisely above the left breast pocket was a massive, heavy rack of military ribbons and commendations, topped with a combat action badge. Mitchell stopped breathing. The flashlight in his hand trembled slightly, its beam dancing across the polished brass and silver hardware of the uniform. His eyes drifted up to the epaulets on the shoulders. Pinned securely to the dark fabric were two heavy, sterling silver eagles. Colonel. A colonel was an 06, a remarkably high-ranking military officer. But it was the insignia pinned to the lapels of the tunic that caused the floor to completely drop out from under the patrolman's stomach. There, gleaming in the harsh beam of the flashlight, was a distinct, solid gold emblem. A cross sword and a feathered quill pen. Even a small-town patrol cop knew what that symbol meant. It was the insignia of the Judge Advocate General's Corps, the military's elite legal branch. Mitchell's brain violently misfired as the catastrophic reality of the situation crashed down on him. The man he had just racially profiled, illegally detained, aggressively handcuffed, and publicly humiliated on the side of the interstate wasn't a drug runner. He was a sitting colonel in the JAG Corps. He was a chief military prosecutor, a man who possessed a lethal, encyclopedic knowledge of criminal law and federal civil rights statutes, and Mitchell had just locked him in steel handcuffs in front of a rolling dash cam. The adrenaline that had been fueling Mitchell's power trip instantly evaporated, replaced by a wave of cold, nauseating terror. The officer's safety excuse was completely dead. He hadn't secured a weapon. He had illegally searched the personal effects of a senior federal military official. He had just stepped into the kind of civil rights violation that destroyed careers, a federal civil rights violation that the Department of Justice took very seriously. Mitchell slowly zipped the garment bag closed. His hands were shaking so badly he almost snagged the fabric. He backed out of the vehicle and gently pushed the car door shut, treating the door handle as if it were a live explosive. Slowly, Mitchell turned around and looked toward the front of his cruiser. Samuel Barrett was still standing there, staring directly into the lens of the dash cam, waiting. He hadn't moved an inch. He didn't need to. He had already won. Officer Derek Mitchell walked back toward the front of his police cruiser. His heavy tactical boots felt like they were made of lead. The arrogant chest-puff swagger he had displayed just 5 minutes earlier was completely gone, replaced by the pale, rigid posture of a man walking to his own execution. He stopped a few feet away from Samuel Barrett. Mitchell reached with trembling fingers toward his duty belt, pulling out his small metal handcuff key. He forced a weak, incredibly nervous smile onto his face, desperately trying to de-escalate the catastrophic trap he had just sprung on himself. "Look, Samuel, sir," Mitchell stammered, his voice entirely stripped of its previous authority. He took a hesitant step forward, holding up the key. "Looks like we had a little misunderstanding. I cleared the back seat. Everything looks good. I'm going to take these cuffs off, give you a warning for the fog line, and let you get on your way." Mitchell reached out to unlock the steel bracelets. "Do not touch these handcuffs," Samuel Barrett commanded. He didn't yell. The volume of his deep baritone voice didn't rise a single decibel, but the absolute razor-sharp authority in his tone caused Mitchell to freeze mid-step, his hand hovering in the air. "You do not have my consent to remove these restraints, Officer Mitchell," Samuel stated, his eyes locked dead onto the terrified patrolman. He was acutely aware of the dash cam's microphone recording every syllable. "You detain me under the guise of officer safety. You then use that unlawful detention to bypass my explicit denial of consent and conduct a warrantless search of my vehicle. You are not going to sweep a civil rights violation under the rug with a verbal warning." Mitchell swallowed hard, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "Sir, please. I was just doing my job. I made a mistake." "You made a deliberate choice," Samuel corrected him coldly. "Step back from me and call your watch commander to this location immediately. Do it now." For a second, Mitchell looked like he might argue, but the sheer, immovable presence of the military prosecutor crushed any remaining resistance. Defeated, Mitchell slowly stepped back, reached for the radio mic clipped to his shoulder, and requested a supervisor to his location. The next 12 minutes were an agonizing, silent purgatory for the patrolman. Samuel stood perfectly still in front of the cruiser, his hands bound behind his back, waiting. Mitchell paced nervously in the wet grass of the median, unable to make eye contact with the man he had profiled. Finally, a white SUV with supervisor markings pulled onto the gravel shoulder. Sergeant Miller, a seasoned 20-year veteran of the department, stepped out. He took one look at the tense scene, his pale, sweating patrolman pacing in the grass, and a sharply dressed, completely composed black man standing in handcuffs in front of the dash cam. "Mitchell, what the hell is going on here?" Sergeant Miller barked, walking briskly toward the cruiser. "Why is this man cuffed?" Before Mitchell could stammer out a lie, Samuel spoke. "Sergeant," Samuel said, his voice carrying clearly over the highway noise. "I am Colonel Samuel Barrett, Staff Judge Advocate. Your officer initiated a pretextual traffic stop, unlawfully detained me in handcuffs without reasonable articulable suspicion, and conducted a warrantless search of my rented vehicle against my explicit, recorded denial of consent." Sergeant Miller stopped in his tracks. He looked at Samuel, absorbing the military title and the flawless legal terminology. Then he whipped his head around to glare at Mitchell. The sheer panic in his patrolman's eyes confirmed every single word the colonel had just said. "Mitchell," the sergeant said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, terrifying whisper. "Did you search his car?" Mitchell opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He just gave a small, pathetic nod. Sergeant Miller closed his eyes for a brief second, realizing the department was about to be hit with a massive, indefensible lawsuit. He immediately walked up to Samuel, pulled his own handcuff key, and unlocked the steel restraints. "Colonel Barrett, I profoundly apologize for this," Sergeant Miller said quickly, taking the cuffs off. "This is not how this department operates." Samuel slowly brought his arms forward, rubbing his wrists. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten them with violence. He simply delivered the procedural death blow. "Apologies do not amend constitutional violations, Sergeant," Samuel replied smoothly. "I am formally requesting that you preserve all dash camera and body camera footage of this interaction. I will be contacting the district attorney and the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division this afternoon to file a formal complaint regarding deprivation of rights under color of law." Samuel turned, adjusted the collar of his navy blue polo shirt, and walked back to his rented Chrysler. He didn't look back. He started the engine, smoothly merged back onto the interstate, and left Officer Derek Mitchell standing on the gravel shoulder, completely paralyzed, realizing he had just thrown his entire career away for a fabricated traffic violation. Talk about picking the absolute worst target for a power trip. Do you think Officer Mitchell deserved to lose his badge for this illegal search? Or should he get a second chance? Drop your verdict in the comments below. I read every single one. If you love seeing arrogant people face real, undeniable legal consequences, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and check out the next video on your screen right now. Stay safe out there.